Hey folks, if you enjoy the show and you want to help us make more videos, please do consider supporting us on Patreon. Okay, thanks, bye, love you. Every year Game of Thrones returns to television, the internet loses its mind over spoilers. This year, given it's the penultimate season, has had many people in an especially cautious disposition regarding social media and word of mouth. I don't watch the show, but I very much understand the anxiety from my Breaking Bad days, but why exactly are we so obsessed with spoilers? Believe it or not, there have been a multitude of small-scale studies on the effects of spoiler culture, which have returned quite divisive and even underdeveloped conclusions, ranging from spoilers ruining the experience to actually enhancing it. The latter seems the most surprising, so let's start there. A study conducted by the University of California, San Diego, took a sample of 176 male and 643 female participants to partake in 3 experiments involving 3 different short stories: ironic twist, mystery, and evocative literature. In each category, the participant would read a different story that was spoiled, one that included a spoiler paragraph as independent text prior to reading the story, and one where the spoiler was included within the context of the story. The results showed a majority in favor of spoiled in both ironic twist and mystery, while evocative literature was treated less favorably, likely due to the expressive nature of the storytelling, but still had a marginal majority nonetheless. Honestly, the numerical data doesn't prove much, especially given Albany State University conducted a similar study on personality traits 3 years later to replicate the results, but none of them matched. But Albany State found a bigger correlation in personality type that indicated the enjoyment of spoilers. They found those that enjoyed complex abstract problem solving and high emotional engagement preferred unspoiled narratives, whereas those who simply focused on superficial details like costumes and environments and responded passively to the story, understandably, didn't care either way. What we can extract from both separate pieces of data is the emphasis on perceptual fluency, which describes the reader's ability to process information with ease and pleasure. That component of pleasure plays intrinsically into the experience of watching, reading, or listening to the story. Universally, everybody wants to enjoy the story first and foremost, and not get bogged down in far-reaching complexities. When audiences are confused by complex or ambiguous ideas, it counteracts their enjoyment. And this speaks of the predominant audience, not those familiar with art house or abstract experiences who don't take as much pity on mainstream perspectives. With this, Zillman broke down the anatomy of suspense and reinforced the conventional belief that spoilers ruin a story because suspense generates enjoyment upon a positive resolution of narrative uncertainty. In other words, we have the excitation transfer theory, where excitement generated by one stimulus accentuates the response to later stimuli. For example, a villain causes the viewer to be angry because of their actions, which builds over the course of the story. Thus, it subsequently heightens the pleasure of seeing the villain being beaten by the hero at the end. In the context of spoilers, it shows that seeing the uncertainty resolved makes it more enjoyable, so surprisingly for some, the spoiler has proven to help make the ambiguity less jarring to comprehend. More specifically, schema discrepancy theory suggests that increased predictability can result in increased positivity of effective response, although this effect is dependent on initial level of uncertainty. Yeah. In other words, according to the UC San Diego summary, plot is overrated. It's relevant to viewing pleasure, which predominantly derives from the quality of the writing in question, especially given our willingness to re-experience the same story again, regardless of the way it's plotted. So in that case, is spoiling Game of Thrones make the story any better? No! The Albany State study highlights a crucial feature ignored by the UC study. Emotional investment is everything to the experience of the story. Aesthetic qualities like dialogue and description help enhance appreciation for the story, which we'll look at in this topic, but they still largely serve as window dressing to the storytelling in question. In the world of television, film, and even video games, there is a hefty amount of time spent before the spoiler becomes relevant, which makes building certain information all the more jarring when the spoiler makes it utterly meaningless. You don't get the same effect when reading short stories like most of these studies use. Imagine following a character arc only to know they eventually die later down the line. The death isn't the point, it's the character development that makes the plot point engaging and worth investing in to begin with. Re-experience isn't the same as the initial experience. We want to revisit dramatic, scary, and funny moments because we enjoy or appreciate the journey between the conflict and resolution. The emotional attachment outperforms obtaining information we've already received in our first experience. In fact, a study was conducted on the effects of spoilers in narrative consumption by lost spoiler fans, which I didn't even know was a thing, where people would know the spoiler to shortcut the suspense of an entire episode. In their eyes, spoilers were part of the larger puzzle of the story, allowing them to take information to piece together an understanding of an immensely complex show, and what the researchers concluded was simply that the interpretation of the text is no different from the way in which people choose to read it to begin with. In some essence, it allows people to reevaluate their experience or provide them with an alternative means in which to experience a story non-traditionally. But most importantly, it points out one fundamental human truth. People like to feel involved. We live in an instantaneous culture who want the ability to share opinion at any moment. There's a comfort mentality to it, one in which we feel part of the conversation or indeed the event itself. There's a satisfaction in identifying with the content through its most pivotal cause, and that's the spoiled information. Knowing what happens is a component of social participation, which Jonathan Gray calls anti- or non-fandom, people with marginal interest who simply want to participate in water cooler buzz. You can still appreciate a story without ever properly experiencing it. It's just that you're not a fan, which of course sounds incredibly obvious. Think of it as having insider info, or more socially, gossip. It's something disconnected with you personally, but it helps you to align yourself with others regardless of your emotional investment in the information. Albany State's study implies this: when you're introduced to the spoiler, there's no need to invest any further time with it, thus completing the task of experiencing it without ever technically doing so. You might not get all the aesthetics specific to the narrative, but the pleasure derives from the way in which you want and choose to read it. I don't watch The Walking Dead anymore, but I somehow feel urged to know what happens at the end despite having no intention of watching it. It adds a sense of completeness and satisfaction to resolve the ambiguities of where I ended my experience. And at the same time, I know Game of Thrones spoilers to help me involve myself in a friend's eagerness to talk about it. And what each study shows is that we have the inbuilt ability to connect each spoiler fragment to piece together a story we've learnt entirely out of sequence. Ultimately, it's not about knowing the spoiler more so than helping to contextualize our understanding of highly discussed forms of entertainment, whether it be natural curiosity or a feeling of involvement, or for some, helping to make sense and appreciate the story overall in an accessible manner. At the end of the day, spoiler culture proves something about human tendencies. We like to feel involved without ever having to apply any effort to do so.